Hey, thanks for making it to Veterans Info Tap. I'm glad you made it. Have some really interesting news on the CPI data and COLA predictions. The CPI data was just released for August's numbers here today, September 13th. And next month is going to be for September's numbers will be released in October on the 12th. And at that point, we will be realizing what the actual COLA will be. And what the number will be adopted for the actual pay increase, right? So I know it's not a pay increase, right? It's a cost of living adjustment that effectively increases your pay. So just to keep it in easy terms, right? Now, there is going to be a higher COLA than previously predicted. Okay, and this is evidenced by this last month, August numbers. And if things don't drastically change the other way, if we keep the trajectory in which we are headed today, from August numbers through September's numbers, we're going to be seeing a higher than previously projected cost of living adjustment, effectively an increase to your VA disability payments, your Social Security payments, whatever is affected by COLA, okay, so the cost of living adjustment, you will be seeing a higher number. Now, I have an article that I'm going to read, but I also wanted to dive into a few of the key takeaways from the CPI data before we jump into the actual article with the prediction. So, with that, hit the thumbs up, subscribe, share with a friend, all that good stuff. I really appreciate it. If you're not a member, consider joining. It does help the channel immensely, and I appreciate every one of you members. Thank you so much for joining. And you get the little asterisk or emblem. I call it something different all the time. I don't know, a little circle thing with a star that helps me to identify you in the comments, and it makes it much faster to find you. So with that, let's jump into it. So the U.S. Consumer Price Index report for August was again just released today, which is September 13th, 2023. Here are 5 key takeaways, and this is from Bloomberg. And it says here, CPI rose 0.6% from the prior month, the most in more than a year, and was up 3.7% from a year earlier, more than expected. This is what's going to drive up that COLA, right? Our pay increase effectively. So that's one bullet point. Second bullet point, core prices, which include energy and food, climbed 0.3% on a monthly basis, more than forecasted, and were up 4.3% year on year. In other words, inflation is still running warmer than the federal government would like. Next bullet. Overall, the single biggest contributor to the monthly gain in CPI was gasoline. And I had talked about this before, that if oil and gas prices remain on that upward trajectory or even just flatten out and stay high, that is going to have a trickle effect on a lot of the other aspects of CPI just for the cost of doing business. So, which again, it rolls down to us as the consumer, right? So the NCPI was gasoline, which accounted for more than half of the increase. Shelter cost also kept pressure up, advancing for the 40th straight month and bypassing economists' expectations for this category to slow. There were also notable increases in airline fares, auto insurance costs, new cars, and food prices, which I am sure everyone who's watching this has felt one of those at least. Next bullet, stock futures and treasuries initially slid, but then recouped losses. Contracts on the S&P 500 were flat as of 9:05 a.m. this morning after dropping as much as 0.4%, while 2-year yields were down about 2 basis points at about 5%. Interest rate futures suggest that the bets continue to be divided on whether the Federal Reserve will hike one more time this year. So it's still in the air and about a 50-50 split. The next bullet, the report complicates the picture for Fed policymakers who meet later this month to set rate policy. While they're likely to look through a temporary bump in energy price prices, the shelter component is still running hot, and gains across other categories could give them pause. The broader economic picture could also support another hike. The labor market, while showing cracks on the margin, remain tight. Last bullet here, the CPI report has been a challenging one for the Biden administration to message. Consumers feel higher prices at the pump and in the grocery store, the two places that you visit the most. Republicans have leapt on that, even though inflation is broadly out of the administration's hands and one for the monetary policy. We're coming up on an election year, so you can expect more political wrangling over the CPI report going forward. And that concludes that piece. Now I want to jump into the actual article for you here with the price prediction. So hang on here with me. This is really good information. So the headline is Social Security COLA, which the VA adopts, right? So we would be getting that as well. So this article is obviously focused on Social Security, but COLA is COLA at the end of the day. So cost of living adjustment for 2024 prediction rises with latest CPI report inflation data. So the forecast for next year's Social Security increase rose 3.2% from 3% on Wednesday after the government said inflation ticked up in August. Annual inflation in August rose to 3.7% from 3.2% in July, but off a 40-year high of 9.1% in June of 2022. Without the volatile food and energy sectors, the so-called core inflation rate rose 4.3%, down from July's 4.7%. Energy declined 3.6% over the year, while food rose 4.3%. Compare that with a 12.5% drop and 4.9% increase, respectively, in July. And again, all this is going to be put into the description if you want to read through it. Shelter, which includes rents, jumped 7.3% over the last 12 months, but it was still softer than July's 7.7% gain. Although inflation remains much higher than the Federal Reserve's 2% target, the trend remains mostly lower, which means Social Security recipients will see a lower cost of living adjustment of 3.2% next year, according to a forecast from the Senior Citizens League, nonprofit seniors group. That's less than half of the 4-decade high of 8.7% COLA in 2023, but still higher than the 2.6% average over the past 20 years. Now, I'm going to throw in there that you're going to hear a lot still of COLA is going to be less than expect a lower COLA and that type of stuff. Well, yeah, of course. Compared to the 8.7%, it's going to be less. But there were points around the middle of this year, maybe the first quarter of this year, where some loose projections were sub 2% or sub 3, in the 2% range, 2.5, 2.75, or 2.7, whatever, somewhere around there. But now we've pushed to 3%, and now we're at 3.2%. And my anticipation, and I've been saying this, is going to be probably, I'm kind of hedging my bets around the 3.4 range, because I think that September's numbers aren't going to fare well. So with that, let's just kind of dive back into this here. So lower inflation is welcomed, but the harsh reality is that the amount that the COLA's increased benefits as most years is meager at best, said Mary Johnson. She is the Social Security and Medicare policy analyst at the Senior Citizens League. So let's see here. It says here, seniors haven't kept up and inflation made it worse. And I'll tell you that veterans fall in the same bucket, right? So again, this is a Social Security specific article, but by default, we are included into it. So annual COLAs are meant to ensure Social Security and by default VA beneficiaries' purchasing power is not eroded by inflation. However, COLA hasn't kept pace, and seniors, as well as veterans, were the only groups that saw its share of poverty increase between 2020 and 2021, would be my guess. The Census Bureau said, because again, this is a Social Security and specific senior kind of article. On Tuesday, the Census Bureau also reported that older adult poverty jumped to 14.1% in 2022 and 9.5% in 2020 and 10.7% in 2021 after accounting for government cash and non-cash benefits, geography, taxes, and necessary expenses. Social Security only replaces roughly 1/3 of the middle class of a middle earner's average wages, according to the Social Security the Social Security Office. And making matters worse, 59% of older adults that start Social Security benefits before reaching full retirement age and receive a permanently reduced benefit, according to a poll of 2,259 retirees surveyed this month by the Senior Citizens League. So remember, you have different stages, right? That you can take the early Social Security, you can take the full, or you could take the bumped up version if you hold off long enough. Even though inflation this year has been running below the 8.7% beneficiaries received, seniors haven't been able to recoup the losses they incurred in the past 2 years when inflation reached a 40-year high, Johnson said. So the bottom line is that we're looking at a higher than previously projected cost of living increase for both Social Security, VA benefits, really anything that is going to be affected by COLA. But primarily, right, on this channel, I'm talking about veteran stuff. And by default, sometimes I'll get into Social Security stuff because of the demographic of our veteran brother and sisterhood. So with that, thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate each and every one of you. And if I come across any other new predictions or projections, I will go ahead and share that with you. Have a great one. And remember, if we don't take care of each other, something went wrong.